Hey colleagues, how are you doing? This is John Herrera, President of MuniTemps Municipal Staffing Solutions, and here today with CitySpeak, the podcast. As usual, I'm talking about all things municipal and all things that pertain to the financial management, public administration, and improving the efficient delivery of municipal services to our stakeholders and our residents and businesses. I'm in my hotel room today because I had to be out at a beautiful little city out here in the desert. I just got out of a city council meeting where we considered the budget for the coming fiscal year. I love working with these council people. I have some beautiful city council people, very smart, and they're very prepared. They study their agenda packets, which means I have to take my game up and always keep it up at a high level. And the same thing for the other directors that work on the team. As you are all coming to the end of a 6-month process to adopt your budget for the next fiscal year, or maybe the next 2 fiscal years, I just wanted to talk about one topic. Do you know the difference between the balance sheet and the budget of your organization? Do you know the difference between the balance sheet and the budget for your organization? Why does it matter that you know? The biggest reason why you need to know the difference between the balance sheet and the budget for your organization is that it makes you more popular at cocktail parties. Well, all joking aside, that's what an economics professor used to tell me a long time ago. But really, it's very important that you understand the difference between the balance sheet and the budget of your organization. Whether you are the city manager or the finance director or department director or a management analyst, whatever your role is with the city, and I suppose even for city council people, understanding the difference between the organization's balance sheet and the organization's budget is very important. I wanted to do a little quiz here, or maybe like a little question and answer exercise, and hopefully there's some gold nuggets you might be able to take away, especially for those of you who are still considering your budget proposals and your budget adoptions with your local government organizations. This actually applies even in nonprofit organizations and private sector organizations, but I specifically work in local government. So here we go, some questions. Which is more important, the balance sheet or the budget? Think about it. Which is more important? Put your comments down below. Number 2, what purpose does a balance sheet play in the organization's decision making? What purpose does the budget play in your organization's decisions? What exactly is a balance sheet? What is a budget? What accounts do we use to prepare the budget? In our accounting system, what accounts do we use to prepare the budget? What accounts do we use to prepare the balance sheet? Do you know the difference between nominal accounts in your accounting system and real accounts? Nominal accounts, real accounts. Which accounts apply to the budget and which accounts apply to the balance sheet? So nominal accounts, real accounts, both of the accounts. What's the relationship between the balance sheet and the budget? And what's the relationship between the budget and the balance sheet? And lastly, I could go on, but I'm going to just stop with one more question. What is a fund? Within your balance sheet, what is a fund? Within your budget, what is a fund? So think about that. Put your comments in. Maybe before you listen, pause the video right now, and before you move on, answer them. Comment. I want to see if you guys know that. But here's a couple of brief answers that I can come up with for you. So, which is more important, the balance sheet or the budget? Well, I think most of you know the answer to that. They're both important, because the balance sheet presents the financial position of your organization at one point in time. The budget represents the financial activities of your organization over a period of time, usually over a year. What purpose does the balance sheet play? Well, the balance sheet provides you the financial position of your organization at a point in time, so you can see all of the listing of all the assets of your organization, all the liabilities of your organization, and the residual equity or fund balance, the capital, right? What's left over between assets minus liabilities equals the equity or fund balance. That fund balance needs to be analyzed by looking at the individual asset accounts and the individual liability accounts. You then can come up with a balance sheet fund balance, or the reserves, or I should say unreserved balances, so that you can see what's spendable and available to fund your budget. Not all budgets are funded solely through revenues. Sometimes you have to dip into reserves, and that's not always a bad thing. So again, they're both equally important, and the role that each plays, well, they're interchangeable. I've already talked about what a balance sheet is and what a budget is, right? Balance sheet, a financial position statement at one point in time, right? The budget is a spending plan. It's the estimate of all the money coming in and all the money going out, and then how much of that funding needs to come from current year revenues versus fund balances. What accounts do you use to prepare a balance sheet? Assets, liabilities, and equities. What accounts do you use to prepare a budget? Revenues and expenditures, right? That's pretty easy. Which accounts are nominal rates, nominal accounts, and which accounts are real accounts? Well, the balance sheet uses real accounts. Assets, liabilities, and equity are considered real accounts because they don't lapse at the end of the year like the budget. The budget uses revenues and expenditures, and those are called nominal accounts. That's just a term they came up with a long time ago. That just means that at the end of the year, the revenues get zeroed out, the expenditures get zeroed out, and the money goes into fund balance. And that's why they're called nominal accounts. Real accounts, they go on forever in the balance sheet. What is the relationship between the balance sheet and the budget? And the budget and the balance sheet, I've kind of alluded to it already. The balance sheet provides you the financial position at a point in time, so you can see what your cash balances are, your receivables, your payables, and your spendable fund balance. And the relationship that it has to the budget is that there are times that you need to use your fund reserves, your fund balance, to pay for those some of those expenditures, especially if they're one-time expenditures. And lastly, what is a fund? A fund is a separate and distinct legal entity. The general fund, the special revenue funds, capital projects funds, debt service funds, proprietary funds, right? Enterprise funds, internal service funds, all these different funds, they are all separate and distinct legal entities. And therefore you need to understand that every fund is standalone. But as I'll get into in greater detail later another time, you need to understand that relationship with those different funds. Fund balance, equity in each fund, right? Spendable versus non-spendable fund balances in the balance sheet. Understand the detailed assets and liabilities, and make sure that you understand the due tos and due froms in between funds when they're going to be paid. Assets, liabilities, equity. So understand the fund balance sheet and the budget. Very important that you understand them. I'll get into more detail in the extended version of the CitySpeak, the podcast. But for now, that's the LinkedIn version, the 10-minute version. So thanks for joining me on LinkedIn. But stay with me. Those of you that are already on YouTube, stay with me. Hang on, don't go anywhere. In 5 seconds. Hold on, almost there. Okay, very good. So for those of you that stayed with me for the extended version, let me go into a little more detail to help you to understand the difference between the balance sheet and the budget for your organization. The balance sheet deals with a financial position at one point in time. The balance sheet specifically keeps track of all of the assets that are owned by the city, most importantly cash, receivables, and other spendable assets, right? Especially for the general fund, the governmental funds, right? We're very concerned about that. So the balance sheet is what the financial position is at one point in time. In the budget, we're dealing with revenues and expenditures, money coming in, money going out, and what's left over is a surplus or a deficit, right? So understand that. If you ever asked a question about the budget, almost anybody can tell you what a budget is. A spending plan, how much money is coming in, how much is going out, how much we have in the bank and fund reserves, right? The budget is really easy to explain. But ask somebody, tell me about the balance sheet. You want to throw somebody off during a budget meeting, whether you're a council member. In a future CitySpeak podcast, I'm going to be talking about the 5 questions that every city council person should know to ask of the finance director to provide the greatest transparency on the financial position through the balance sheet and the budget through the revenues and expenditures. But for right now, enough to say that you need to be able to know about the balance sheet. Where do you go to find the balance sheet? Well, if you're a city council person, work through your city manager. If you go directly to your finance director, he or she is going to panic. Oh my gosh, the city council is asking for a copy of our balance sheet. You better not ask, or you better not tell a city council person to put in a public records request when they ask for the balance sheet. But if you're a city council person, or you're a department director or whatever, say, hey, Mr. Finance Director or Mrs. Finance Director, would you please print out of our accounting system, whether you're using Tyler Technologies, American Funware, Springbrook, New World Systems, whatever you're using as a software, Cassell, maybe even QuickBooks, although QuickBooks doesn't really do fund accounting very well. But ask your city manager if you're a council person, and if you're anybody else other than the council, ask your finance director. Say, I would like for you to print raw numbers. Just print a report directly out of our accounting system. Give me the balance sheet for all funds. Maybe you can get the ability to print it yourself, because sometimes when you print a report like a balance sheet or a revenue budget or expenditure budget, whatever it is, you can select certain restrictions in the field and you don't always get the complete information. But if you want to do your own, if you can't sleep tonight or tomorrow night, or you're somebody who has insomnia, ask your finance director or let you print out the balance sheet, but not just for one fund, not just for the general fund. Print out the balance sheet for all funds. And most cities have anywhere from 20, 30, 40, 50, over 100 different funds. That means that every fund is going to have its own balance sheet, right? Balance sheet, asset, liability, equity accounts. Every fund is going to have its own revenues and expenditures. Every fund is going to have its own trial balance. But I'm just talking about the balance sheet right now. I don't want to get into a whole lot of nerdy accounting stuff. I'm a CPA, so I live this stuff, right? I eat balance sheets for breakfast and budgets for dinner. Yeah, I really do. I love this stuff. I've been doing it for 35 years, over 35 years now. I should be retiring, but I'm still pretty high on this stuff. So, but get the balance sheet. Look at it. I know it's kind of scary, especially if it's all messy, right? If you look at the assets section, the cash, receivables, due froms, whatever, in the balance sheet, those are typically okay. They're pretty clean. But you look at the liabilities of your balance sheet, you have all your accounts payable, all of your payroll payables, developer deposits payable, other deposits payable in your, especially governmental funds, right? And then you have your fund balance. You might look at that and say, hey, I don't know how to read this thing. Call me or email me, John, John at munitemps.com. I'll give you a couple pointers. It's not that big a deal. It's not rocket science. It's hard passing the CPA exam. I'm a CPA, and I'll tell you, it's a really mondo difficult exam. But you're not becoming a CPA. You just need to be able to read a basic financial statement called the balance sheet. And to the extent that you can read that, you're going to be better at preparing budgets. You're going to understand the relationship of the balance sheet to the budget. They're both very important. The balance sheet, which is part of the trial balance, by the way, don't get spooked. Trial balance just basically means a listing of all the assets, liability, equity, revenue, expenditure account, the 5 account types, and not just for the general fund, but for the special revenue, debt service, capital projects, proprietary funds, and on. Okay? Spend half an hour. If you're a management analyst, you probably became a management analyst because you didn't like accounting. You didn't do well in accounting, right? I know what it's like. But as an analyst, you need to understand accounting just a little more. Understand the balance sheet, and you'll see how it integrates with the budget. Okay? So the purpose of the balance sheet is so that when the finance director is presenting the budget, he or she is showing the revenues, the expenditures, and the fund balances. You can see if he or she is presenting the accurate numbers for fund balances. Because usually the budget, unlike the balance sheet that has to follow GAAP, GAAP, generally accepted accounting principle, the budget doesn't have to follow GAAP. Very few cities prepare their budget in accordance with GAAP. They typically prepare them in accordance with some management standard. And there is no right and wrong on how you prepare the budget. Nobody audits the budget. The auditors don't audit the budget, except to the extent that you go over budget. They might report on that, right? There's a stewardship responsibility in the footnote section of the annual comprehensive financial report, the annual audit report, right? But are you still with me? I know this stuff is pretty nerdy, but like I said, I go over this stuff all the time. So I thought I'd share it with you guys to everything you ever wanted to know about your organization's balance sheet and the budget and the relationship between the budget and the balance sheet. You need to know both. When you prepare a budget, you got to know the balance sheet. I already told you about the accounts, real accounts, nominal accounts. Remember what I said? Real accounts are accounts that are used in the balance sheet. Assets, liability, and equity accounts, those are real accounts. They're called real accounts because at the end of the fiscal year, they don't lapse. They continue forever. The budget, however, revenues and expenditure accounts, those are nominal accounts because they lapse at the end of the year. They get zeroed out. Sometimes they get rolled over as a continuing appropriation or whatever. But just remember that. I mentioned the relationship already, but let me go on to a very specific point about fund accounting, F-U-N-D, fund accounting. It's really important that you understand that. And I don't mean just understand that this is the general fund, special revenue fund, capital projects fund, debt service fund, enterprise fund, internal service fund, trust funds, agency funds, and so forth. More than that, you need to understand what happens. Sometimes the general fund, the finance director may say, our general fund has a $10 million fund balance or a $20 million fund balance. You as a council person needs to be able to ask, now, Johnny, is that a spendable fund balance? Whoa, spendable fund balance. What do you mean? Well, I'm just asking you, is that $20 million or $10 million that you're reporting in the budget spendable fund balance? The balance sheet shows the fund balance. The budget doesn't have a fund balance. The budget just picks up the fund balance number from the balance sheet and puts it into the budget. But sometimes finance directors get a little creative there. So ask your finance director if that fund balance that he or she is showing in the budget under fund balances by fund, is it spendable fund balance? Even better, why not ask him or her, hey, print out directly from your system. I don't need you to do anything else just print me out a balance sheet, not just for the general fund, but for all funds. If you really want to get nerdy, print out all the balance sheets for all funds and go to the cash account for every single fund with an adding machine, right? Remember I said there's 20, 30, maybe 40, maybe 50 funds. So you're just going to pick off the cash balance of every one of those funds, come up with a total cash balance, first and foremost. You say, hey, we have $50 million or $40 million or $100 million in cash across all funds on our balance sheet. Let me see our bank reconciliation for, what was the last bank reconciliation we did? Oh yes, we're current. Our last bank reconciliation we've done is May 31st of 2023. And what's the reconciled bank balance? Oh, it's 48,523,261. Well, why does the balance sheet show this number? Oh, well, then maybe that's outstanding checks. Maybe there's some deposits in transit. Okay, but show it to me. I want to see how it's done if you want to get that nerdy. Now, I know that if you have a good trust level with your finance director and so forth, there's no need to do that. But not all finance directors are always looking into the details. They may be relying on an accounting clerk or an accountant, and sometimes people are cooking the books. You've heard that term, right? Cooking the books. Sometimes, every once in a while. City managers, you got to know what's in your balance sheet. Just get into your balance sheet for one day of the year. Yeah, you're going to spend a few hours, but ask questions. I have a couple of smart city managers that I work with, and they ask me questions. Sometimes they say, I don't know what I don't know, but I'm like, you're playing a game with me. Your tricks won't work on me, Mr. City Manager. I say that with all a term of endearment. No, you got to be able to show the numbers, show where everything is at. And the more transparent that you can be as a finance director, as a CFO, the better. Okay, so, but city managers, ask the question. City council, ask the question about the balance sheet. Ask about the fund balances in the balance sheet. Are they the same in the budget as they're shown in the balance sheet? And right now we're working with the balance sheet for probably the most recent balance sheet is dated May 31st of 2023. The June 30th balance sheet will be available in a few days, but we typically don't disclose that until after we've reconciled cash, right? My cash accounts are pretty close to being done through May 31st. And so anyhow, that's something that I thought was very important. Understand funds. Now here's something to pay attention to. You have 20, 30, 40, 50 funds, right? General fund and all the other funds. Are there any funds that have negative cash? Because if you do, you have to find out why those funds have a negative cash. What good does it do you to have a general fund balance sheet that's got $20 million in cash, but you've got some other funds out here that have $10 million in negative cash because 5 years ago, 6 years ago, they overspent and you've never replenished those funds. If grant funds or special revenue funds or certain capital projects funds go into negative, a deficit cash balance, who's going to make that whole? The general fund, you can't say, well, the general fund that's not the general fund. Well, guess what? The general fund ends up paying for any and all negative balances in the special funds, unless it's enterprise funds or unless it's a special assessment district, community facilities districts, whatever, that they would eventually generate their own revenue to make it up, right? But short of that, you need to make sure that at some point the general fund is going to have to pay back those funds. I was working at one city, this was back in the early 1990s, and they had $10 million, $8 million, $10 million negative cash balances in their development impact fee funds. They had overspent those development impact fee funds. Well, they were never going to get repaid. At least it wasn't going to happen for a long time. And what should have happened right away is that the general fund should have, if not replenished those funds, set up in advance. There's due to, and due from between funds for short-term repayment of loans from one fund to another, but then there's advances to and advances from. That's for longer-term type of loans, inter-fund borrowing, right? But look at those other funds, because when we do pooled cash and we pool the cash together, all those funds that have deficit cash balances, they get hidden in there. And oftentimes the auditors, they only report the general fund, the major funds, right? And then they group all the other minor funds, right? In the footnotes, they do have a listing where they show funds that have negative balances, but you need to understand the balance sheet and looking at the balance sheet for every single fund and the fund balances. If they have negative fund balance, is it because cash is negative? Usually it's because of cash being negative. In some prior year, some fund overspent. Enough said about fund accounting and understanding pooled cash, how it hides negative cash balances, and the general fund is not showing its true financial position unless it accounts for those negative cash balances in other special funds. Spendable versus non-spendable fund balance. It doesn't do any good to have $20 million in fund balance if it's not spendable. It may be made up of assets that are never going to be collected in cash. If it's not in cash, it's not spendable fund balance, right? Look at the assets, individual asset accounts. What's the underlying detail supporting those assets? Look at your liabilities. Look at the underlying detail supporting those liabilities. There are control accounts and the receivables, control accounts and the payables. There's subsidiary ledgers that roll up to the total receivables, subsidiary ledgers that roll up to the total accounts payable, and so on. Look at your developer deposits. You may have $5 million balance in your liability account called developer deposits, but how do you know that there aren't dozens and dozens of developer deposits that have negative balance? They overspent, but the community development department never went to collect. You'll never know the difference because, again, it's just pooled together. It comes up as a single lump sum. And unless you look at the underlying subsidiary ledger for developer deposits or any other control accounts, you'll never know that your true spendable fund balance is not accurate. So, bank reconciliations. Timely bank reconciliations are critical to understand the true fund balance in your balance sheet, which carries over into your budget. Interfund transfers, due tos, due from, advances. How likely that these interfund borrowings are ever going to get paid off? Find out all about that. Now, do you know the difference between a balance sheet and the budget? I think you do. You'll be able to ask better questions of your finance director. And as I said, you're going to be a lot more popular during the cocktail parties. All for now. John Herrera, President of Munitemps, Finance Officer, Finance Director with the CitySpeak blog and podcast. Please comment. I want to know more about what you think so I can keep writing my articles. Thank you so much. Have a nice evening. Happy budgeting and happy new fiscal year. Bye-bye.